When we last left off, the Rebel Alliance had managed a triumphant victory above the fourth moon of Yavin, putting an end to a years-long operation and the Empire's planet-ending superweapon, the Death Star. With that momentous victory, the Alliance gained both credibility and support from the rest of the galaxy, and each day, more systems pledged their allegiance to the cause. However, danger was afoot. The Empire was now aware of the Rebel base's location and, following the Battle of Yavin, continuously harassed the Rebel base, forcing the Alliance to relocate. In today's video, we'll be picking up the story a few years after the Battle of Yavin and following along as the Alliance weathered Imperial assaults, won the most critical battle of the Galactic Civil War in Endor, then continued fighting its way through the remainder of the galaxy, seeking to cleanse the remnants of the Empire. Because, as we'll learn today, a war isn't determined by a single critical battle. If anything, after the Rebels' victory at Endor, the Galactic Civil War only got more intense as they attempted to clean up what was left of the Empire. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. For now, let's go back to the Rebel base on Yavin, where things were looking pretty dismal for the Alliance.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
After the Battle of Yavin, the Alliance was forced to relocate. Many other locations were considered and one was even attempted. The Alliance relocated to the graveyard world of Boz Pity, which some of you may recognize from our many videos about the Outer Rim siege there. During the Clone Wars, the Separatists had successfully established a base on the desolate world and used it as a staging ground for their attacks on Republic-controlled worlds in the sector. But in the case of the Alliance, their base was quickly discovered and destroyed. Instead, they found a better alternative proposed by Luke Skywalker himself, Hoth. For the most part, we doubt Hoth needs much introduction. Located far out in the Outer Rim territories along the Ison Corridor, Hoth was as hospitable a place as our own Antarctica. It was a desert planet covered in endless swaths of snow and ice, with very little life that could survive in those infernal conditions. The Anowat sector it was located in was remote even by Outer Rim standards. Really, the planet's only claim to fame is the fact that the Alliance picked it to set up a new base after the Yavin base was abandoned. Most likely, Hoth was selected because of how remote it was, which, by default, meant it was also far away from Imperial influence. It certainly seemed to help, as it took the Empire 3 years to track the Rebels down. But when they finally did, all hell broke loose on the frozen wasteland. The new facility on Hoth was called Echo Base, and it took the Alliance approximately 2 years to complete its construction. Given Hoth's harsh environment, the only sane way to construct anything on the planet was to build it into the side of a mountain and allow the stone to protect against the harsh winds and inclement weather. The Rebels, having at least some sense, did just that, digging into a mountain range and hollowing it out to create a base within, with large bay doors on the north and south faces. Echo Base had a large hangar, a well-supplied medical facility, a command center, and all the defense systems you'd expect: static anti-infantry, vehicle emplacements, defense trenches along the perimeter, planetary comscan units, shields, and more. At its peak, the base hosted 7,500 combat and command personnel, 120 droids, and 350 medical personnel. As part of their defenses, Alliance troops patrolled the base mounted on snow speeders and tauntauns, which were bipedal caprine creatures native to the planet. Other buildings had been erected outside of the base to offer additional protection. A Rebel Alliance fortress, other military buildings, and a defense bunker were connected to the base through tunnels. Additional support was offered around the perimeter by scout posts named Echo Stations, which formed a network of information transmission. All in all, we can safely say the Rebels tried their best to set up a well-defended and hidden base. Unfortunately, or perhaps inevitably, they were found. Naturally, the Empire hadn't stopped searching for the new Rebel base. In an incredibly ironic but fitting twist of fate, an Imperial unit had actually stumbled upon Echo Base during an unrelated mission to Hoth. The Imperials attacked but were so unprepared and outnumbered that the Rebels crushed them easily, leaving only a handful of Imperial survivors. These troopers attempted to report their findings, but their commanding officer, General Neva, deleted these reports because they showcased his utter incompetence. By covering his ass, Neva bought the rebels a little more time to prepare for their inevitable discovery. According to the 2001 game Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds, the Empire learned of the base's location during a raid on Zaloris City, the capital planet of Zaloris, in which Imperial forces came upon a minor Rebel Alliance base. Zaloris had been preparing to secede from the Galactic Empire, and the rebels were naturally keen to support their efforts. The base wasn't prepared for Darth Vader, however, and it was quickly destroyed. Thanks to intel they found in its archives, the Imps were able to narrow down their base location to the general vicinity of the Elrud system in the Outer Rim. Following this discovery, Death Squadron, Lord Vader's personal fleet group, began deploying Viper probe droids via hyperspace pods to planets across the western reaches in the rough vicinity of the Elrud system, as seen at the start of The Empire Strikes Back, one of which happened to land on Hoth. The rebels didn't take long to discover and engage the probe droid. Han Solo and Chewbacca went out to investigate rogue radio transmissions near the shield generator, running into the droid in the process. The probe then self-destructed after notifying the Empire of its discovery, which turned out to be the evidence the Empire needed to locate the new rebel base. Initially, the commander of Death Squadron, Admiral Kendall Ozzel, thought the probe droid had only found a smuggler's base. Unluckily for the rebels, Vader didn't agree with his assessment and sent for Grand General Malkor Brashin and his talented second-in-command, General Bren Tantor, to oversee the assault. Soon after, Vader and Death Squadron arrived in the system, jumping out of hyperspace under the cover of a meteor shower, which made detecting them difficult. Their initial plan had been to launch a sneak attack, initiating a long-range orbital bombardment that would destroy the rebel spacecraft, defense structures, and the base itself, followed up by a sweeping ground assault led by General Maximilian Veers to capture any survivors. If the Imperials had gone ahead with this plan, it would have probably been a resounding success. However, Imperial soldiers, especially those in command, were often less keen on serving the Empire and more keen on serving their own interests. On that note, Admiral Ozzel hatched his own plan to catch the rebels by surprise. He led his fleet to exit hyperspace near the star system, which backfired horrendously. Without the cover of the meteors, the rebels' early warning sensors detected his incoming ships, activating the planetary shield generator near Echo Base and thus cutting off any hopes of an aerial bombardment. Seeing their plan falling apart, Veers notified Darth Vader of the developments. The Sith Lord realized their only recourse was to send a ground assault team down to the planet's surface, where they could march on Echo Base and deactivate the shield generator. Before he left with them, however, Vader was sure to reward Admiral Ozzel's initiative with a rather fatal force choke before promoting his chief fleet captain, Firmus Piet, to the rank of Admiral to replace Ozzel. According to Vader's new plan of action, Major General Veers was to land close to the energy shield's field and lead a ground assault to take out their power generator, thus killing the energy shield. Meanwhile, he and his Death Squadron would set up a blockade to prevent any rebel ships from fleeing. Tantor would be in charge of the entire operation, coordinating forces both in orbit and on the surface according to Veers' instructions. The Imperial Assault Force, dubbed Blizzard Force, landed at the Morsh Moraine. The force was made up of 501st Legion snowtroopers who were transported aboard AT-ATs and A5 Juggernauts. The troop transports were supported by additional vehicles such as AT-PTs, AT-STs, AT-RAs, alongside more Viper probe droids for all their probing needs. Right off the bat, Blizzard Force lost 3 walkers to treacherous ice as General Veers attempted to take the most dangerous path in a puzzling attempt to impress Vader. After their first few losses, he was forced to retreat and to take the southern approach to Echo Base. With the Imperials at their doorstep, the Alliance called a retreat and ordered the base to be evacuated. To take Blizzard Force on while the evacuation took place, the Alliance sent out Rogue Squadron in T-47 snowspeeders armed with blaster rifles and several types of artillery emplacements, including anti-vehicle laser cannons and anti-infantry laser batteries. For something heavier, they also activated the V-150 Planet Defender, the ion cannon they had installed to defend the base. As Rogue Squadron set off, the ion cannon provided cover. It single-handedly destroyed the Imperial-class Star Destroyer Tyrant and disabled another, the Corruptor. This cover was necessary as it created space for Rebel transports to make a break for it and escape. As Blizzard Force marched on the Rebel emplacements, they destroyed Echo Stations 3T8 and 5-7 along with the 6 evacuation transports that had been docked there. But the shield generator wasn't the Imperials' only target. Recognizing the threat the ion cannon posed to the Star Destroyers in orbit, a squad of snowtroopers supported by an ATST had broken off the main core and were headed toward the planet Defender, hoping to take it out. Rogue Squadron, Luke Skywalker among their midst, were on the defensive, doing their best to deal with Blizzard Force's advance toward the planetary shield's power generator. They were able to destroy several Imperial walkers, but the enemy was too well armed. At the same time, Jobin, Mon Mothma's son, had been leading the 4th squad of the Alliance Special Forces Wilderness Fighters to attack the Imperial forces and supporting Rogue Squadron. When they heard of the squad assaulting the ion cannon, however, Jobin split his forces and personally led half to defend the ion cannon. Thanks to the Wilderness Fighters' efforts, the rebels destroyed the ATST and dispatched the snowtroopers before they were able to damage the cannon. As Veers and his forces reached the base, they attempted another assault on the ion cannon at Outpost Beta, but were ultimately unsuccessful. The rebels had dug into the trenches surrounding the base, using heavy blasters against the incoming Imperial walkers. However, their firepower was too weak to penetrate the AT-AT's armor, and the walkers were able to plow through most of the entrenchments. Skywalker had more luck, using an improvised strategy to down 2 walkers alone, but things weren't looking good for the Alliance. Most rebel soldiers in the trenches lay dead, dying, or had been taken captive by the enemy. With their forces thinning out rapidly, a retreat was called. With the rebels in retreat and his own forces advancing mercilessly, General Veers broke away from the main body in a walker of his own, dubbed Blizzard 1. With the rebel opposition scattered, he was able to advance on the shield generator and utterly destroy it, effectively bringing the planetary shield down and signaling the end for Echo Base. With the shield down, Vader could now proceed with his initial plan. Thus, the orbital bombardment commenced, raining missiles down that destroyed the defensive structures outside the base, damaging the base itself and destroying many rebel ships that were making a run for it. With the shield down, Blizzard Force was able to concentrate their efforts on the ion cannon, which followed the shield generator into oblivion. The only small mercy was that they weren't quick enough to prevent the cannon from providing cover for several retreating rebel ships. Soon after the ion cannon was destroyed, Darth Vader himself made planetfall with reinforcements. As one body, the Imperial troops marched on Echo Base and utterly destroyed it. Vader himself led the way into the mountain base, cutting down any rebel or droid in his path. Han Solo and Princess Leia Organa were also in Echo Base, attempting to board the Millennium Falcon so they could escape. They were accompanied by several rebel soldiers, but when the Imperials came across them, the other soldiers remained behind to buy the two enough time to escape. This was the case with many other rebel troops, many of whom chose to stay behind and fight the Imperials to the death in order to buy time for their comrades to escape. As the 501st moved through the base, they finally reached the final hangar and landing area where they opened fire on the last remaining rebel transport left on Hoth. A firefight broke out in the hangar, during which both sides took heavy casualties. Ultimately, and perhaps unavoidably, the Empire won. During the fights, Imperial troopers had slipped a beacon under the rebel transport. The role of the beacon was to transmit its coordinates to a Star Destroyer in orbit. All the Imperials had to do was defend it until the Star Destroyer had locked into its target, then make a hasty exit just in time for the ship to open fire directly on the hangar, obliterating it, the rebel transport, and any rebel troops still trapped within the base. The Imperials had won. On Hoth, Imperial forces rounded up any stragglers, executing some and capturing others. In the atmosphere, Skywalker and the rest of Rogue Squadron were fighting to protect the last few fleeing transports, but even they could do little before being forced to escape themselves. All in all, the Battle of Hoth was an Alliance bloodbath. In total, only 36 rebel transports were able to make it for hyperspace, and of those 36, 23 were destroyed before they could escape. Thousands of men and an immeasurable amount of material had been lost, and if that weren't enough, the rebels had lost their main base, forced once more onto the back foot. Their losses severely weakened the Alliance, giving the Empire an upper hand. The blow the Alliance suffered was so devastating that many in the Empire believed the war was over. Palpatine himself delivered a rousing speech shortly after the battle, promising a swift end to the galactic civil war. But of course, the Alliance didn't give up. Most of the senior personnel had somehow managed to make it off Hoth alive, and thanks to their continued presence, the Alliance managed to not simply fall apart. It was these figureheads that kept the rebels together. The Alliance might have been battered and bruised, but it was still standing, and soon they would turn the tables on the Empire. A year after the Battle of Hoth, the tide of war shifted irrevocably above the forest moon of Endor. Soon after the loss of Echo Base, a network of Bothan spies informed the Alliance the Empire was constructing a second Death Star, this time without the design flaws they had exploited in the past. With no way to destroy it after it was completed, destroying the incomplete Death Star became a critical priority. They also learned its location, Endor, and that it was protected by a powerful deflector shield, but not yet armed. And if that weren't enough, the Emperor himself would be on board, overseeing the final construction. The rebels planned a two-pronged attack. First, a commando squad led by Han Solo and the now defected General Bren Tantor would land on Endor aboard a stolen Imperial shuttle and disable the Death Star's shield projector. Then, the Alliance fleet would be able to attack the Death Star directly and destroy it. The plan began with a rebel attack on Imperial forces near Selast in a bid to draw Imperial ships away from Endor. However, Palpatine had anticipated this move and had prepared the Imperial fleet to remain close to Endor, where they would defend the Death Star rather than attack the rebel fleet. It was a trap. What the rebels didn't know was that the Death Star's primary weapon systems were already operational. Defending it were Darth Vader's personal fleet, the Death Squadron, and over 30 Star Destroyers, which remained mostly hidden. The plan was to crush the rebel fleet at Endor, then take Mon Cala and Chandrila, which would be the first worlds destroyed by the second Death Star. To keep things brief, there were three major components to the Battle of Endor: the ground assaults, the naval theater, and the final battle between Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, and Emperor Palpatine. Following their plan, Solo led a team down to Endor aboard the Tidarium, a stolen Imperial shuttle. Renegade Squadron also slipped past the planetary shield and made planetfall. As Solo and his team traversed the jungle toward the Imperial bunker, they encountered scout troopers but were able to dispatch them before they alerted the Imperial garrison. Along the way, the rebels encountered the Ewoks, the native people of Endor. Although they were initially met with hostility, they were able to befriend the Ewoks and were accepted into their tribe. Being local, the Ewoks also knew the fastest way to the generator. At this point, the rebels had made camp in the Ewok village and were planning to set out at dawn. During the night, Skywalker revealed to Leia they were siblings, then left in secret. Fearing his presence would reveal their position, Luke planned on surrendering to Vader in the hopes of bringing him back to the light. It didn't take him long to run into an Imperial patrol and surrender to them. The Imperials brought him to the Death Star, and a search party was sent to comb for any remaining rebels. Han Solo's team and Renegade Squadron were able to rendezvous the next day, now accompanied by a force of Ewok warriors. With one Ewok causing a diversion, the rest of the rebels were able to take out the remaining scout troopers guarding a secret entrance to the Imperial bunker. However, they were ambushed inside by another contingent of Imperials who forced them out of the bunker and into the line of sight of hundreds of stormtroopers and walkers. Facing down this insurmountable force, they were saved by the Ewoks who sprung out of the trees to their rescue and Renegade Squadron. Eventually, however, the Ewoks were forced back and decimated by the heavy assault. After considerable effort, the battle in the jungle turned in the rebels' favor. Meanwhile, Solo and his team used the codes in a stolen Imperial walker to convince the Imperials within the bunker to send out reinforcements, claiming they were winning and needed support to rout the rebels. When those reinforcements came out, however, they were easily overwhelmed. Now inside the bunker, the rebels were able to clear it of lingering personnel, then rigged it to explode. With the Imperial bunker gone, the deflector shield protecting the Death Star also came down, opening the way for the rebels' second phase, the naval assault. Above Endor, the Alliance began their assault when the rebels had first arrived at the bunker. The shield protecting the Death Star was still active but undetectable, causing some pilots to destroy themselves on it. When they realized they had an impenetrable force field ahead of them and Death Squadron came up behind them, the Alliance realized they had fallen for the Emperor's trap. First, TIE fighters and interceptors swarmed the rebel fleet, taking out some smaller warships. Bombers followed, which pushed the Alliance into action. The bombers had to be destroyed before they reached their capital ships. Even though their squadrons neutralized the bombers, many frigates were still damaged. And all this time, Death Squadron's 30 or so Star Destroyers remained at a safe distance, watching, waiting. The reason became quickly clear when, to the shock and horror of the rebels, the Death Star activated the super laser they had believed inoperable and destroyed the Liberty. Despite the initial panic this caused, the rebels quickly mustered themselves and attacked the Imperial fleet head-on, hoping their proximity to the Star Destroyers would force the Death Star to limit its fire. Soon, the two fleets were engaged little more than a few hundred meters apart. The rebel fleet lost several ships, but they were able to take out 2 Star Destroyers in the process. Outnumbered and trapped, the rebel fleet fought on. This was their only chance to destroy the Death Star, and they couldn't waste it. A plan was formed. The rebels' new target became the battle cruiser Pride of Tarlandia, which was the Empire's main communication ship. It was responsible for jamming the Alliance's comms, but also for enabling Imperial communication. With it destroyed, not only did the Alliance regain the ability to coordinate, but the Empire lost theirs. Once word reached them that the shield generator had been destroyed, they moved in on the battle station's main reactor. Red and Gold squadrons led the way into the superstructure, with the Millennium Falcon following behind. Once the fighters had entered, they split up, forcing the TIE fighters that had been in pursuit to split up, leaving the Falcon mostly unmolested. Outside the superstructure, the fleet continued harassing Death Squadron, hoping to keep them away from their target. This part of the battle saw many important ships destroyed on both sides, including the Executor, Darth Vader's personal command ship. Now, if the shield generator were ever to be destroyed, the Death Star crew had orders to reorient the station and obliterate Endor. While the station began moving into its new position, the Millennium Falcon sped toward its reactor and, with the help of 2 well-aimed proton torpedoes, the second Death Star was no more. What most didn't know at the time was that the assassin droid IG-88 had long since melded his consciousness with the Death Star. In setting up for a droid uprising, he subtly sabotaged the Imperial's efforts, causing the Death Star to miss when engaging the rebels. In a particularly ironic twist of fate, the Empire also benefited from the rebels destroying the Death Star. If it had been completed, IG-88 would have taken full control over it and turned it on their organic masters. But there was one final element to the Empire's defeat at Endor, and in many ways, this was their true defeat. The final part was Luke Skywalker's self-imposed mission to redeem Darth Vader. We've spoken before about how Luke being able to bring his father back to the light against all predictions spat in the face of destiny. Although he was alone, Luke single-handedly brought about the demise of the Sith. By redeeming Anakin Skywalker, the two were finally able to defeat Darth Sidious. By all accounts, the Emperor himself was dead. With the Death Star destroyed and their leadership decapitated, the surviving Imperial forces were left in disarray. They retreated deep into Imperial space, leaving the Alliance wounded, but triumphant. Across the galaxy, thousands of worlds erupted into celebration. The war wasn't over, but the Emperor was dead. The Empire had lost much of its upper leadership, and many Imperial worlds saw a chance to be free. Following the battle, many worlds, such as Naboo and Tatooine, staged uprisings to overthrow their Imperial governments. Some uprisings were quelled, but others, like the one on Bespin, were successful. Coruscant also saw some revolts, but the capital of the Empire was still under a tight Imperial fist, and that uprising was squashed swiftly. Meanwhile, Death Squadron and any remaining Imperial forces reconvened near Anaj, then returned to the core to guard against any rebel incursions. The Empire had been dealt a serious blow, but it wasn't defeated yet. On Coruscant and thousands of other worlds, the Imperial government endured, but a critical battle had been won and the playing field had been leveled. The Alliance, soon to become the New Republic, would spend the next few years battling the Empire for control of the heart of the galaxy, ushering in a major change in the balance of power. Many battles still lay ahead. Following the Battle of Endor, rebel forces clashed with Imperial garrisons across the galaxy as the Alliance began the arduous task of liberating every occupied world. One of these battles took place on a planet called Bakura, but in many ways, it's probably not the sort of battle you're expecting to hear about. Bakura was a small planet on the fringes of wild space. It was the homeworld of the native Kurtzin and home to an isolated group of colonists called the Bakurans. Overall, it was a mostly unremarkable planet, far removed from the central goings-ons of the core. The Empire had still invaded it and were occupiers at the time of the Battle of Bakura, but the Alliance was out to liberate it. Against all odds though, the Alliance and the Empire actually became allies in this battle, brought together by a looming threat neither faction wanted to deal with: the Sea Rook. Native to a small star cluster even further out into the unknown regions, the Sea Rook were a saurian species with particularly distasteful tendencies. Until this point, they had been kept mostly in check by the Chiss Ascendancy, who had taken it upon themselves to prevent the Sea Rook from expanding. The Sea Ruvi Imperium, however, as their empire was called, hadn't given up. Around 4 ABY, the Sea Rook turned their gazes coreward, and the first planet in their path just so happened to be the unfortunate world of Bakura. Both the Alliance and the Empire were determined to stop the Sea Rook before they pushed too deep, primarily because they were concerned it would cause widespread panic, and rightfully so. In case you've never heard of the Sea Rook before, they were a species heavily reliant on droids. To power those droids and their ships, they used a process called entrenchment, or in layman's terms, sucking the life out of living beings and using it as fuel. This wasn't something either side was keen on dealing with. The battle we'll be discussing today is the third Battle of Bakura. Before this point, the Sea Rook had made other attempts at taking the planet and had been repelled but not defeated, and so, for once, political differences were set aside, and the Empire and the Alliance teamed up to defend the galaxy from this alien incursion. Representing the Alliance was Commander Luke Skywalker, with Leia Organa and Han Solo as backup, and representing the Empire was Commander Peter Thanas. In one of the unlikeliest of teams, the two factions coordinated their military assets, melding ships and troops into mixed units quite effectively. In a short time, the joint forces had built up a rather effective defense grid around Bakura. Despite the mutual goal, however, politics weren't completely set aside. The local Bakurans had been dissatisfied with their imperial occupation for years, but attempts by Leia Organa to rouse them into open rebellion drew the wrath of the imperial troops stationed on Bakura. Although a treaty was signed calling for a cessation of hostilities, the hostilities didn't cease. The imperial occupiers, led by Governor Narrators, tightened security and crowd control measures to choke any budding resistance movement and did their best to turn the sentiment of the locals against the rebels, but this approach only worsened the brewing civil unrest. After their initial attack had been repelled, the Sea Rook pulled back to just beyond the grid and began plans to capture and intact Luke Skywalker. To this end, they made a deal with Governor Narrators. If he handed them Skywalker, they would withdraw. A rather rough trap saw a three-way fight break out in the local spaceport, but the eventual result was Luke Skywalker unconscious and en route to the Sea Ruvi fleet aboard a shuttle. To keep their attention off the shuttle, the Sea Rook launched an attack on the defense grid. It was much more powerful than the defenders had anticipated, but Captain Peter Thanas' tactical skills saved the joint forces from destruction. 9 Sea Ruvi picket ships faced off against the Millennium Falcon, 3 TIEs, and Rogue Squadron. The Saurians launched their lander craft, but these were slow enough that the joint forces easily picked them off. As the naval battle progressed, The Millennium Falcon got closer to the Shriwir, the Siruvi command ship, attempting to take it out. However, aboard the Shriwir, Skywalker was being carried to the entekment lab. Dev, a slave the Jedi had liberated during the three-way battle at the Bakuran spaceport, was doing his best to wake him so they could escape together. When that didn't work, and he was discovered by their captors, he tried to kill Skywalker to prevent the Siruk from enteking him. Luke, however, was awake, and he single-handedly dealt with their enemies, then destroyed any and all the entekment rigs to prevent the Saurians from any more shenanigans. As the two made their way through the ship, cutting down enemy droids, the Siruk abandoned their ship, unwilling to face a Jedi on the loose. Skywalker proceeded to the engine room, killing the ship, and by doing so, liberating all the souls the Siruk had trapped within their tech. Meanwhile, out in the naval theater, Nerus contacted Thanos, informing him of Skywalker's abduction and ordering him to destroy the Shriwir and any escape pods. You see, when Luke was still on Bakura, Nerus had infected him with a mind parasite that was both contagious and fatal. This was a ploy to destroy the Siruk, allegedly, but now it served as an excellent excuse to kill the Jedi. The rebels begged the captain to reconsider the absurd orders. Thanos powered ahead, ordering his Imperial ships to open fire on the Shriwir. Luckily for the Alliance, an attack by a squadron of battle droids moved Thanos' ship, the Dominant, out of range to attack the Shriwir. Within the hour, the joint forces had destroyed even more of the Siruvi ships, which called a retreat. Every ship except for the Shriwir and its 4 escorts pulled back. Not trusting the Imperials, Solo ordered the rebels to gather around him, but it was too late. The Imperials turned on their allies, taking out the flurry before it could group up the others. To no one's surprise, with the Siruvi threat dealt with, the Imperials were now free to disregard their truce with the rebels and continue the fight, this time trying to destroy the Alliance starships. Only a few rebel ships were able to gather around the Falcon, and they were soon surrounded and driven into the Karek's tractor beam, leading Solo to believe the only way some of them could escape was if he rammed the Millennium Falcon into the cruiser. Planetside, the political intrigue continued to deteriorate. Governor Nerus revealed to the Bakuran senators that he planned to quell any local resistance, betray the Alliance once they had defeated the Siruk, and take full control of Bakura as its new prime minister. Despite the senators' protests that the Rebel Alliance had fought to protect them, Nerus insisted that the Empire was enough, and Coruscant would punish their world for accepting help from the enemy. He also reminded them Bakura had benefited from being a member of the Empire. What Nerus didn't know was that, out in the city, an illegal protest had begun to gather. With most Imperial forces occupied with the battle above, the Bakuran resistance was able to easily overpower his stormtrooper guards and storm the building, capturing Nerus. They were also able to infiltrate the Imperial military base and seize control of it. While the resistance was liberating their world of Imperial occupation above the planet, the battle was coming slowly to a close. Aboard the Shriwir, Skywalker and Dev managed to use the ion cannon to destroy one of the 4 escort ships protecting the command ship. After Skywalker dealt with the last remaining crew members, Solo, Organa and Chewbacca boarded the vessel and evacuated him. After his rescue, Luke reached out and made telepathic contact with Thanos. Amazingly enough, he was able to convince the Imperial captain to stand down. Recognizing the dishonor of his commander's orders, Thanos agreed to send a medical team for Luke, and Dev surrendered himself and his flagship, the Dominant, into Alliance custody in exchange for his men being allowed to return home. With the Siruvi threat neutralized and Bakura liberated from its Imperial shackles, the third and final battle of Bakura was over. With it, the Alliance to restore the Republic was reorganized into the Alliance of Free Planets, a precursor to the New Republic, and Bakura was one of the first worlds to join it. The road to galactic liberation and the restoration of the Republic was hard, but it was well underway. 1 month after the Battle of Endor in 4 ABY, Mon Mothma issued a declaration of a new republic. With this document, the Alliance to Restore the Republic had officially morphed into the New Republic, a successor to the old. As a government, it had its head of state, a new constitutional charter, and everything you would expect of a budding galactic power. And as we mentioned earlier, the New Republic was eager to continue liberating worlds coreward. As part of its campaign to control the Inner Rim, the New Republic fought once more against the Galactic Empire, this time on the planet Mindor. Mindor, also known as Tasban 1, was a planet in the Tasban sector of the Inner Rim. The world itself was fairly unassuming, but it wasn't Mindor the New Republic wanted, but Kronar. But let's back up a moment. Following the death of Emperor Palpatine, many of his royal guards teamed up with the former intelligence agent and Dark Jedi, Kronar. He was better known as Lord Shadowspawn, and together with the Emperor's guards, he took over the Inner Rim and committed acts so awful even Anakin Skywalker would have blushed. To name a few, his repertoire included piracy, terrorism, and wholesale slaughter against any world that supported the New Republic. He had expanded his debauchery into the Mid-Rim as well, kidnapping some, killing most, and otherwise terrorizing the galaxy. And as you might have guessed, he was headquartered on Mindor. Initially, due to the carnage left behind by these incursions, it was thought Lord Shadowspawn simply killed everyone he came across. Unfortunately for them, he didn't. He would bring them back to Mindor, where they were sent to his sorting centers. There were camps where Shadowspawn's servants would select Force sensitives among his captives, then turn them into pawns. And believe us, the term wasn't a cute nickname. This was the nickname given to Shadowspawn's handpicked agents during his campaign against the New Republic. To turn a captive into a pawn, his servants implanted melt-massive crystals into their brain. These crystals spread through their nervous system, allowing Shadowspawn to control them through the Force. This connection was further cemented by a shadow crown that was also attached to the prisoner's skull. When activated, the shadow crown projected a holographic mask over the pawn's face, replacing their face with that of Shadowspawn. All of this was just part of Shadowspawn's plan to restore the Empire. He hoped that, with his pawns and the help of the Emperor's royal guard, he could eradicate the budding New Republic and reclaim the galaxy for the Sith. To this end, he declared himself the new Galactic Emperor. Quite understandably, the New Republic felt like they had to take action. Thus, they launched what is known as the Chronal Campaign, a campaign focused on bringing Chronal down and ending his reign of terror. General Luke Skywalker was appointed the head of this campaign, and he led New Republic forces through a series of bloody and protracted battles through the Inner Rim, trying to reclaim them from Shadowspawn's control. But Shadowspawn was ready for him. It had been foretold that he would face one single obstacle of note, and he interpreted the prophecy to mean Skywalker. So he awaited their confrontation with anticipation and, as all Sith tend to do, laid a trap for the Jedi. When Skywalker and his forces eventually made their way to Mindor, Shadowspawn was waiting for them. Despite his lack of capital ships, Shadowspawn was able to launch over 1,000 TIEs to harass the Rapid Response Task Force. On Mindor itself, his ground troops were entrenched in a series of fortified pockets across the surface, forcing Republic assault teams to take them on one at a time. All of this was intentional. Mindor had been specially selected because it was surrounded with debris from the Big Crush, an event that saw one of the planets in the Tasban system destroyed in 1 ABY just a few years previously. This debris field formed a cloak of randomly moving rocks and meteors that made traversing it incredibly dangerous for larger ships. TIEs were excellent at maneuvering through them, but the New Republic had only two options: deploy only starfighters and hope they could do enough, or drive the entire fleet through the debris field, brute forcing their way through to low orbit from where they could bombard the base. When planning their assaults, the Republic's #1 priority was utterly wiping out Shadowspawn and his forces. The fear was that, should even a handful survive, they would go on to create more pockets of opposition, forcing the Republic into even more conflicts scattered throughout the galaxy. With that priority in mind, plan became clear. The flagship Justice would lead the Rapid Response Task Force, exiting hyperspace near Mindor, then using microjumps to enter the debris field. Once there, it would deploy CC-7700/E interdiction cruisers to prevent any ships from escaping into hyperspace, trapping Shadowspawn's forces. When the Republic's ships arrived above the world, Shadowspawn sent a wave of TIEs out to greet them, resulting in a small skirmish. That ended when a seemingly unarmed shuttle approached, hailing the Justice. The shuttle alleged that Shadowspawn himself was aboard and wanted to negotiate a ceasefire. Predictably, of course, this was a trap. The shuttle was actually carrying a gravity bomb that went off so close to the Justice, it tore the ship apart. But that wasn't all. Shadowspawn's forces had hidden other gravity mines along the debris, and when these were activated, they severely damaged the Republic's ships and destroyed the interdiction field. With the Republic forces in disarray, Shadowspawn's remaining forces launched from the asteroids further out from the planet, essentially trapping the Republic ships between Mindor and themselves. For days, waves of TIE fighters were thrown at Republic forces, totaling over 1,000. Despite the absurd number of TIEs harassing them, the 23rd Combat Starfighter Wing was able to form a defensive perimeter around their command ship. Captain Turosk, who had taken command after the loss of the Justice, had organized the Republic response. His troops were employing repulsors and gravity wells to gather debris into piles, clearing a path for his ships to escape into hyperspace. Thankfully, Captain Lando Calrissian arrived with reinforcements, which even included a team of Mandalorians. One minor side effect of their debris clearing was that, with large chunks of debris falling into Tasban, the system's star, radiation spewed into the system, rendering many electronic devices useless. The Republic took advantage of this by using the planet as a shield while allowing the radiation to deactivate any remaining gravity mines. But that was only the naval theater. On the ground, Skywalker had been captured by Shadowspawn. He, Solo, and Leia Organa were able to defeat him, although they learned that Shadowspawn was nothing more than an illusion Chronal had created. With their ships closer to Mindor, the Republic landed their forces planetside where they could march on the weapons protecting Shadowspawn's fortress. Their aim was to destroy the gravity gun, but what they didn't realize was that this had been yet another part of the Dark Jedi's plan. With Republic forces all gathered in one place, Chronal activated the gravity stations he had buried under Shadow Base, raising the fortress into the sky from where his forces could deploy the gravity gun with devastating effect. Calrissian retreated, fearing the planet would be torn asunder. After surrounding the flying fortress, the captain put a desperate plan into effect. He used the gravity well projectors on his interdiction cruisers and sent the Imperial gravity bombs back at Shadow Base. Chronal, meanwhile, fled the system in an escape craft. But before he jumped to hyperspace, however, he used his mind control link to command his forces into kamikaze-style suicide runs. All around Mindor, TIE pilots crashed their fighters into any Republic ship, trying to deal as much damage as possible. But Chronal fleeing didn't save him. In Shadow Base, Luke Skywalker encountered a man by the name of Kar Vastor, who was yet another pawn of Chronal. Using the connection Chronal had forcibly created between himself and Vastor, Luke was able to reach through the Force to Chronal himself and destroy him. With Chronal dead, the Imperials under his control were freed and immediately surrendered. Sadly though, it was soon discovered that Chronal had embedded a dead man switch in the Crowns and Melt Massive Crystal networks. With his death, all his troops followed swiftly, leading to the near instant death of 50,000 or so innocent people. With no opposition, the Republic took any survivors, cleared a path to hyperspace and escaped the system, which imploded behind them. But the loss of life on Mindor was so traumatic for Skywalker that, 6 months later, he returned from the military to focus on restoring the Jedi Order and preserving life. But worry not, it turned out that Chronal was as dead as Palpatine. That is to say, he somehow survived and would return later to cause even more havoc. But that's a story for another day. The last battle we'll take a look at today is one of the most important moments in the New Republic's early history, the liberation of Coruscant. As we mentioned earlier, the Alliance's victory at the Battle of Endor in 4 ABY may have decapitated the Empire's leadership, but that didn't automatically destroy the Empire itself. Palpatine might have been the Emperor, but there were many legislative and administrative systems in place that could function without him. If anything, with the loss of the Emperor, many Imperial officials took the chance to accrue additional power. Even with the loss of the Emperor, the Imperial government on Coruscant still functioned, and it was determined to retain control of the Galactic Empire and its territory. We briefly mentioned the uprising on Coruscant following the Alliance's victory at Endor. At the time, billions of Coruscanti citizens took to the streets, celebrating the death of the Emperor. The uprising soon turned violent, with armed members springing primarily out of the oppressed non-human sectors to take on the Imperial forces stationed planetside. Patrols were attacked, statues of the Emperor were desecrated. Faced with an enormous, violent and jubilant riot, the government authorized a brutal crackdown on the population and gave carte blanche to the local military forces to quash the rebellions by any means necessary. The death toll was unimaginable, but the Empire managed to wrest control of its capital back. Naturally, Coruscant was a priority target for the newly established New Republic. Not only was it the heart of the lingering imperial government, but it was also the historic heart of the Republic. Taking it would be dealing a death blow to an organized imperial opposition and retaking the symbol of the Republic. After Endor, retaking it became a priority, although the New Republic was aware it had to be careful. In the first 6 months after Endor, New Republic agents destroyed several Coruscanti holonet installations, disrupting communication between the central government and imperial garrisons across the galaxy. As a result, many high-ranking Imperials out in the galaxy became warlords operating under their own authority and seizing their fleets and sectors for themselves. Meanwhile on Coruscant, the higher echelons of Palpatine's government were vying for power, sabotaging one another in a bid to become the new Emperor. In 5 ABY, these power struggles saw Imperial Intelligence Director Yusan Issad assume control of Imperial Center, though her reign was brief and full of struggle. She only had one claim to fame, but we'll get to that in a moment. In 6.5 ABY, Rogue Squadron, led by Captain Wedge Antilles, was sent on a secret mission to Coruscant. The undercover rebel agents were to infiltrate the Eucumenopolis and sabotage the planet's shield generator. To that end, the operatives hijacked a construction droid, then rode it to a nearby command center. Once there, they redirected one of the planet's orbital mirrors and used the intense light it reflected to evaporate large quantities of water out of a reservoir. The resulting sharp rise in humidity led to an electrical storm which frazzled the planetary shields. With the shields down, a New Republic fleet commanded by Admiral Jal Akbar himself could enter the system and liberate Coruscant in the name of the New Republic. Immediately following the liberation, the citizens of Coruscant were overjoyed. Although it isn't mentioned in the sources, we would assume an extensive cleanup project began. As we've seen in canon in The Mandalorian, anyone working for the Imperial government was arrested and sent to re-education camps, and the Imperial framework was dismantled and slowly sifted through. However, all this would take years for the New Republic to organize. In the moment, there was only room for celebrating their newfound freedom. That celebration, however, didn't last long. Although her reign had only lasted 1.5 years, Yusan Issad had one final laugh before fleeing Coruscant. As one of her final acts in power, she had a team of scientists poison Coruscant's water supply with the Krytos virus, an artificial virus that affected only non-humans. Within days of Jal Akbar liberating the planet, millions of non-humans started falling seriously ill and dying due to the Krytos virus. This, of course, triggered some serious resentment. During the time of the Empire, non-humans had been brutally persecuted throughout the Empire's territory, but on Coruscant, the segregation and oppression had been brutal. Non-humans were treated as less than even second-class citizens and corralled into alien-only sectors little better than ghettos. With that still fresh on the non-human Coruscanti's eyes, the outbreak of a virus their human compatriots were immune to felt less like a coincidence and more like a targeted attack, which it naturally was, but not by the New Republic. Although Issad had fled, she had left a mess behind her, just as intended. The liberation of Coruscant was quickly tainted by rising civil unrest between human and non-human species of the world. To add insult to injury, when she had made her escape aboard the Lusankya, the resulting devastation covered over 100 square miles of Coruscant's surface, killing millions instantly. Despite Rogue Squadron's best efforts, she was able to power through the planetary shields and escape the system for the planet Thifera. The civil unrest caused by the Krytos virus was eventually managed when the New Republic devised a cure by combining Bacta with a rare grade of spice rill known as Core. The cure was enough to prevent further loss of alien life, but it would take some time for the relations between humans and non-humans to improve. With Coruscant now in the hands of the New Republic, the Galactic Civil War was practically over. Imperial City was once more renamed to Galactic City, and the planet was officially renamed from Imperial Center back to Coruscant. With Issad gone, the remaining Imperial forces scattered throughout the galaxy fragmented even more. The few remaining members of Palpatine's inner circle were forced to flee into the unknown regions, where they formed a tenuous shadow government. Many of them supported the idea of appointing Chiss Grand Admiral Thrawn as the new Emperor, trusting in his abilities to reforge the Empire and take the New Republic down. But once again, that's a story for another day. For now, the New Republic had reclaimed its historic capital, and the Galactic Civil War was all but over. Over the course of a few long years, the Alliance to restore the Republic had done what many thought impossible. They had toppled a vast totalitarian government, liberated the peoples of many worlds, and now they were finally home. Of course, there was still much work to be done. Even with the central imperial government disbanded or in exile, the New Republic had much cleanup to do. If the bureaucratic nightmares weren't enough, they also had many pockets of imperial resistance remaining. Many Moffs who had gone rogue and turned into warlords had to be dealt with, many more systems had to be liberated, and more importantly, any remaining trace of Palpatine's inner circle still had to be hunted down and killed to eliminate the threat of the Empire ever coming back. Join us next time when we'll be discussing some of these operations, such as the Battle of Dathomir and the Battle of Thyfera. At least, for once, the Republic was not on the verge of collapse, and things were looking up. But what do you think? Had you heard the story of the Battle of Mindor and its Dark Jedi Lord? Did you know the galaxy had almost been enteched by the Siruk? Feel free to let us know what surprised you in this series in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.